Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are standing in a kitchen lit by the weak golden glow of a single overhead bulb. The scent of old tea lingers in the air. My hands are shaking as I clutch the folded piece of paper that changed everything. Outside, the wind is whispering against the windows, but inside, it's silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that presses on your chest like a weight, the kind that makes your ears ring. Today, I buried the man I spent 42 years beside. And tonight, I heard my children, my own blood, say I had no worth left. Just like that. Words spoken in a hallway they thought I couldn't hear from the top of the stairs. She's too old, too out of touch. She's just a burden now. Not even 24 hours after we lowered Harold into the ground. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And leave a comment telling me where and when you're watching from. It means more than you know. I won't lie to you. That night, something inside me shifted. There wasn't rage. Not yet. Just a slow, steady kind of pain, like a bruise forming where you didn't know you'd been hit. I stood there, upstairs in the dark, listening to their voices like they belonged to strangers. Esme, my daughter-in-law, always had a sharp tone. Even when she smiled, it felt like her words came wrapped in warning tape. She was the one speaking the most. She's alone now. What's she going to do with this place? It's too big, and she can't manage it on her own. We need to be practical. Then came Stuart, my only son, my boy. Mom's strong, he said, but not with conviction. Still, I don't know. Maybe we should talk to someone, like a facility? I didn't hear anything after that for a while. Just the blood in my ears. I think that's when it broke. They weren't cruel. They weren't malicious. That's what made it worse. They were indifferent. I hadn't cried at Harold's funeral. I'd stood like stone while the pastor talked about devotion and how Harold had served the community and his family. I hadn't cried when the coffin lowered into the ground. I hadn't cried when the last guest patted my arm and walked away. But that night, when I sat on the edge of my bed and realized that my family had already written me off, the tears came. Quiet, hot, relentless, and somewhere in the middle of all that, something else stirred. I remembered something Harold once said to me years ago, when our business hit a rough patch and I was drowning in doubt. "You're the smartest person I know. You just hide it so well that people forget." Maybe they had forgotten. Maybe I had too, but not anymore. That night, I stayed up and wrote everything down, word for word, while their voices were still fresh in my mind. I made a file. I saved recordings. I started to document everything, because somewhere in my gut, I knew this wasn't just thoughtless talk. It was planning. And what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had more left in me than they could imagine. More memory, more strength, and a lot more patience. I wouldn't fight them the way they expected. No tears, no begging, no angry confrontations, just quiet, steady, deliberate choices. But let's not rush ahead, because before I could reclaim anything, I had to remember what I was fighting for. And that began with this house, the house they said I couldn't manage, the house that had been mine long before they ever learned to walk. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan to have some soft background music, and let's start our journey tonight. I walk through the hall barefoot, the wooden floor creaking in familiar rhythms beneath my steps. Every dent, every groove in these boards, I know them by heart. It's a strange comfort, how even old wood can remember your footsteps when the people you raised no longer do. This house isn't just a house. It's where I brought Stuart home from the hospital, wrapped in blue cotton, eyes squinting against the morning light. It's where Harold and I spent entire winters reading books aloud to each other, passing the same mug of tea back and forth, laughing at nothing. It's where I burned the turkey during our first Christmas, and where Harold ate every last piece anyway, just to make me feel better. And it's where I stood by the window for years, waiting for Stuart to visit, only to watch leaves fall, seasons change, and silence settle in. This house is more than walls and bricks. It's my life. And they want to take it from me because they think I'm too soft to fight, too slow to resist. They see the gray in my hair and assume it comes with fog in the brain. They mistake my politeness for passivity, my kindness for weakness. I let them believe that, for now. Because they also don't know that I've kept every letter Harold ever wrote me, along with one document that none of them knew existed. But we'll get to that later. Right now, I want you to picture something. The living room, mid-morning, sunlight streaming in through the lace curtains, catching the dust in the air like golden snow. The old couch still covered in the knitted afghan Harold's mother gave us as a wedding gift. A soft ticking sound from the clock on the mantel, still working after 38 years. This house doesn't feel empty. Not to me. But to them? To Stuart and Esme? It's a wasted opportunity. They see the square footage, the potential resale value, the money it could bring in to help with their so-called financial burden, and I can already hear the words forming in Esme's mouth. She'd be safer somewhere with more structure. She deserves care we can't provide here. She could have friends, a community, even hobbies. But I know what it really means. They want this house. Not for me, but for themselves. Stuart has always followed Esme's lead. I don't blame him, really. He fell in love with a woman who knows how to speak with confidence and always appears just a bit more competent than everyone else in the room. She plans everything. What she didn't plan for was me still being sharper than I let on. After Harold passed, I found myself spending more time in the study, the room he loved best. It still smells like his cologne, a soft cedar scent that makes me pause every time I open the door. I started sorting through his old files, half looking for distractions, half chasing memories. That's when I found the envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax, labeled in Harold's neat, careful script, for Eleanor, if they come. At first, I thought it was a joke, a sentimental message, a final love letter. But what I found was something else entirely. A letter, yes, but also a copy of an amended will, one Harold had filed in secret with his lawyer just 3 months before his death. It left everything to me. And it included provisions that would disqualify Stuart from receiving a cent if he attempted to override my autonomy or push for institutionalization without a formal medical diagnosis. Harold had seen this coming. He saw it in the way Esme talked over me during dinners, in the way Stuart flinched whenever long-term care came up, in the way they slowly stopped asking questions and started making decisions on my behalf. My husband, my partner of 4 decades, knew I would need protection when he was gone, and he gave me just that. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Not until I was sure. So instead, I poured myself into the house. I fixed the squeaky back door Harold never got around to repairing. I cleaned the attic, sorted through boxes of old school projects, baby clothes, photo albums. I even set up the spare bedroom, part of me knowing I'd need it sooner than later. Because once people like Esme realize you're vulnerable, they don't wait long to move in. And just like clockwork. 3 weeks after Harold's funeral, I got the text. "Hi, Mom. Wondering if we can stop by this weekend? Just to check on you. Love, Stuart." The timing was too perfect. They weren't coming to check on me. They were coming to check out the house. And I was ready. Let them come. Let them walk through the rooms and measure curtains and whisper about floor plans. I would be standing right here, in the middle of it all, invisible to them the way I had been for years. But not powerless. The first thing I noticed when they arrived was the way Esme looked at the living room. Not at me, not at Harold's urn still resting above the fireplace, not at the tea I had just brewed, but the room. Her eyes scanned the crown molding, the high ceilings, the original hardwood floors. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she greeted me. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice syrupy. "You look, well." Stuart came next, a step behind as always. He hugged me stiffly, his hand lingering on my shoulder for only a moment. He smelled like aftershave and indecision, "It's good to see you," he murmured. I nodded, gestured to the tea I had laid out. Lavender and honey, Harold's favorite. He used to say the ritual of tea could solve most problems if you gave it the right kind of silence. We sat. Esme barely touched her cup. She glanced around again, as if trying to visualize furniture that didn't yet exist. "It's such a beautiful home," she said casually. "Timeless! Though, a little much for one person to keep up with, don't you think?" There it was. I didn't answer. I poured more tea and smiled gently. "I manage." She tilted her head, her tone light. "Of course you do, but we just worry, you know? All this space, all these stairs, and you being alone now." I sipped. Stuart cleared his throat. "We've actually been talking," he said. "We think maybe it's time you had some help. Just someone to check in. Or maybe even consider a place where you'd have company. You've always been so social." That's how they framed it. A gift, an opportunity, not a displacement. They didn't ask how I was sleeping at night, or if the bed still felt too big without Harold. They didn't ask if I had eaten today, or if the house creaked differently now in the evenings. They didn't ask if I was still grieving. They asked about logistics, efficiency, practicality. I let them talk. I asked questions that made me sound uncertain. I gave them just enough agreement to feel emboldened. By the end of the visit, Esme had already floated the name of a facility just outside town, very modern. Stuart was talking about next steps and trial periods. They left with hopeful eyes and a promise to return in a week. I sat on the porch after they left, watching their car disappear down the hill. And I felt calm. I had always believed I was a kind woman, and I still was. But kindness doesn't mean being a doormat. It means choosing your moment and using it wisely. The next few days were a performance. I left papers scattered on the kitchen table, made a few mistakes balancing the checkbook on purpose, even forgot to turn off the kettle one afternoon when they stopped by unannounced. Esme raised her eyebrows and exchanged glances with Stuart. I pretended not to notice. They were moving quickly now, and I let them. What they didn't know was that while they were planning my removal, I was planning something very different. I had reached out to Harold's old lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a quiet, sharp man who had always respected my judgment. I sent him copies of everything, Harold's final will, dated and notarized, and my notes from the conversations I'd overheard. I didn't make accusations. I just asked for clarity. He called me 2 days later. "I'm glad you reached out, Mrs. Matthews. Your husband was very specific in his instructions. If anyone attempted to undermine your independence, your ownership of the estate becomes absolute. No trustees, no shared power." I thanked him. I tucked that information into the growing arsenal in my mind. Still, I said nothing. I set out the guest room. New sheets, fresh towels, even a little tray of mints on the nightstand, because they were going to move in soon, and I wanted them to feel comfortable. The more comfortable they felt, the more careless they would become. And they did. Within a week, Esme was asking to borrow the office room to set up her remote work. Stuart moved his boxes in under the pretense of helping me declutter. They stopped knocking before entering rooms. They spoke over me at dinner. And once, I caught them whispering about power of attorney forms. I listened. I smiled. And I waited. Because they thought they were slowly taking over. But really, I was letting them walk into a house that was no longer theirs to touch. A place soaked in memories they never bothered to ask about. They thought I had nothing left to hold on to. They couldn't have been more wrong. It started with little things. Esme replaced the kitchen clock. Just like that. No discussion, no mention. One day, the old one, the one that ticked like a heartbeat through Harold's final days, was gone. In its place was a sleek, modern digital thing with no sound, no presence, no soul. Then came the curtains in the guest room. My sewing room. Esme said the sunlight made it hard to nap. Nap? She had turned the space into her personal retreat. Yoga mat, noise machine, essential oils. I said nothing. Stuart moved into the study next. Harold's study. He claimed he needed a quiet space to make work calls. And at first, he just used the desk. Then he started moving Harold's books into boxes to make room. I walked in one afternoon and saw him folding our wedding photo into a drawer like it was clutter. That was when I started recording, not video, just sound. Quietly, with an old digital recorder Harold had used for dictation. I left it running in the corner when I went to bed early or stepped outside to water the garden. I told them my memory was getting bad, that I didn't want to miss conversations. They never questioned it. And that's when I heard them, truly heard them. Whispers late at night, the clinking of wine glasses, laughter. "She's slower now," Esme said in one recording. "It's like she's already fading." Stuart didn't respond. I mean, if we get her to sign the papers before she forgets more, it's what Harold would have wanted, right? Again, silence. I just think, once this place is in our name, we can actually plan. For our future, a baby, a proper home. I sat there, the night I heard it, with my hands folded in my lap. Calm. Because it wasn't anger that filled me, it was resolve. They had forgotten who taught Stuart to tie his shoes, who sat with him after his first heartbreak, who filled the house with warmth every winter when money was tight and Harold was working extra shifts. They had forgotten that I managed the bills all those years, not Harold. That I chose the mortgage, juggled the accounts, refinanced when needed, and made sure Stuart had college savings. I played the fool, and they played right into it. The next week, I told Esme I needed help going through old financial paperwork. She was delighted. "Of course, let's sort through everything. It'll be good to organize." I handed her a stack of fake statements I'd created with Mr. Peterson's help. Old-looking, mildly confusing, but ultimately meaningless. I watched her take pictures of them with her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I left my phone unlocked and opened to emails with subject lines like memory evaluation request and assisted living inquiry. I'd sent them to myself from a dummy account. I made sure she saw them. The next day, Esme casually brought up a facility again. "It's called Hillside Pines. It's not too far, and it's actually lovely. The people there are trained professionals, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything. Doesn't that sound peaceful?" I blinked slowly. "Peaceful sounds nice." She smiled, triumphant. "We could schedule a tour." I nodded. "And would you be staying here while I'm away?" Her eyes danced. "Well, only temporarily, just until we decide what's next. You know, to keep the house from sitting empty." I patted her hand. "You always think ahead, Esme." That night, I left another file on the dining table, labeled Power of Attorney. Blank, except for my name on the top line. In the morning, I found it had been moved. By then, they were fully settled in. Their coats hung by the door, their toiletries in the upstairs bathroom. Esme had even moved into Harold's side of the master closet. It was surreal, but I wasn't sad anymore, because I knew what was coming. I met with Mr. Peterson in secret 2 days later, while Esme was at yoga and Stuart was on a Zoom call in the study. I left a note saying I was at the pharmacy. Mr. Peterson slid the updated documents across the table. His brow furrowed. "Are you sure you want to proceed this way?" "I'm sure," I said, "but I want to do it quietly, with dignity." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll begin the process today. Once they're served, they'll have 72 hours to vacate, and we'll record the will reading just to be thorough." Perfect. Back at home, Esme was slicing peaches in the kitchen. She offered me one, all sugar-sweet smile. "Don't forget," she said. "We're meeting with someone from Hillside Pines next week. I know it's a lot, but you're going to feel so much more supported." I took the peach, bit into it, and smiled. Because they were sleeping in the house I still legally controlled, eating from my plates, dreaming of a future built on a lie. And soon, the clock they replaced, the curtains they hung, the room they took, it would all be mine again, and this time, without apology. The rain came the night before everything changed. It wasn't a soft, whispering rain. It was loud and heavy, the kind that drums against the windows like a warning. Thunder cracked in the distance, and the wind howled through the old chimney in Harold's study. I sat in the dark, listening to it all, the old house creaking around me like it, too, was holding its breath. Upstairs, I could hear Esme on the phone again, soft, muffled words leaking through the vents. "She's getting worse," she said. "Yes." Confused. Wandering at night. "I don't think she even remembers Harold is gone sometimes." I smiled to myself. I remembered everything. The way Stuart flinched when she said that. The pause in his voice. "Maybe we should wait a bit," he murmured. "Give her more time." More time? Time to what? To forget? To die? "Time won't help, Stuart," Esme replied, her voice tightening. "We're already behind. The lawyer said she could contest things if we don't act quickly." Ah, so now the gloves were off. That night, I left my bedroom door ajar. Just enough. The digital recorder sat on the corner of my dresser, blinking red. I heard them moving in the hallway. Tiptoes, hushed tones. I heard the creak of the study door, the rustle of papers. They were searching, desperate now, looking for what they thought was the only will, the one Harold filed 5 years ago, before we updated everything, the version that split the estate evenly between them and me. They didn't know about the update. They didn't know Harold had rewritten the entire plan just months before his death, because he saw what was coming. They wouldn't find that version in the study. It was locked away in Peterson's office, in a safe. But let them look. Let them panic. In the morning, I made coffee. Black. No sugar. Esme came downstairs looking tired, but she smiled. "Rough night, huh?" I nodded. "Storm kept me up." She hesitated. "Have you thought more about the facility?" I looked her in the eyes. "I have." She leaned forward. "And?" "I think it might be time." She lit up. "Really?" "Oh, I'm so glad. I know it's scary, but before I go," I interrupted gently, "I'd like to have a small dinner. Just the 3 of us. One last meal in this house. As a family," she blinked. "Dinner?" I nodded. "Tomorrow night?" Stuart, who had just walked in, looked between us. "That sounds nice." I set the table the way I always had, with Harold's favorite blue plates, cloth napkins, candles. I made pot roast, slow-cooked, just the way Stuart used to love when he was a teenager. Roasted carrots, mashed potatoes, thick gravy. They sat, unsure. I served them like a hostess. "Before we eat," I said softly, "I want to say something." I pulled a small stack of envelopes from under my chair and placed them in front of each of them. They hesitated. "What's this?" Esme asked. "Letters," I said, "from Harold, and a copy of his final will." The silence was instant. Stuart picked his up with trembling hands. Esme just stared. "I know you've been planning," I said, my voice calm. "I know about the phone calls, the documents you tried to forge, the attempts to get me to sign over the deed." Stuart opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No interruptions. You had your chance to speak all those nights when you thought I was asleep. Now it's my turn." The storm outside had passed, but the tension at the table was electric. "I know Harold updated the will. I was there. I signed the witness form. It leaves everything to me. Full ownership. No room for negotiation. And Mr. Peterson has the original, notarized and recorded." Esme's face drained of color. "I never wanted it to come to this," I continued, "but you forced my hand." "You don't understand," Esme snapped. "We weren't trying to hurt you." "You were trying to remove me," I said, "from my own life, my own home." Stuart looked like he might cry. Or vanish. "I let you in," I said. "Not because I trusted you, but because I wanted to see how far you'd go." And they had gone far. I reached beneath the table and pulled out a second folder. "This is a record of every conversation I overheard. Every recording. Every text message you sent each other on my Wi-Fi. Every plan you whispered in the dark." Esme's hands clenched. "You spied on us?" "No," I said. I protected myself, the way Harold asked me to. Stuart finally spoke. "Mom, what now?" I looked at them, both of them. My son, who I once rocked to sleep during summer thunderstorms. His wife, who I welcomed into my family with open arms. "Now," I said, "you pack your things. You leave, and you never speak for me again." Stuart shook his head slowly. "Where will we go?" "I believe you mentioned a proper home." I stood. "I suggest you start looking." Esme's voice broke. "You can't just throw us out." "I can," I said, "and I already have." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Mr. Peterson stood outside with 2 envelopes in hand. Official notices. 72 hours to vacate. I turned back to them. "I made you dinner. I gave you one final night under this roof, out of respect." They didn't touch their food, and for the first time in weeks, I ate with peace in my chest, because the storm was over, and the house was mine again. I woke the next morning to silence. But this time, it wasn't the heavy, uncertain kind. It was clarity. Esme and Stuart had locked themselves in the guest room the night before, emerging only briefly to slam drawers and mumble arguments I could barely make out. I didn't listen in. I didn't need to. They knew it was over. The 72-hour notice wasn't just a formality, it was final. Mr. Peterson had filed it with the local authority first thing after dinner, and I'd received confirmation just before bed. 3 days. That's all they had left. I took my time with breakfast. Toast with marmalade, black coffee in Harold's mug, the one with the chipped rim he refused to throw away. I sat in the same sun-drenched corner where I used to read to Stuart as a boy. I let the warmth sink in. Around 10 a.m., I heard them stirring. Stuart came down first, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. He looked at me like a boy who'd been caught stealing. "Mom!" I didn't look up. "Yes?" He hesitated. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the empty seat across from me. "We're already talking." He sat down slowly, fingers twisting in his lap. He glanced upstairs, then back at me. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I finally met his eyes. "You didn't mean for me to find out. That's not the same thing." He swallowed hard. "Esme, she just thought it would be best. You've been through so much, and she thought the best thing would be to take control of what wasn't hers?" He said nothing. I took another sip of coffee. "You were my son long before she was your wife." "I know." "Then why did you let her treat me like a liability? Like I was one misstep away from being discarded?" His voice was small. "I don't know." That was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. "I trusted you, Stuart. Maybe that was my mistake." He looked down at the table, the same one where he'd done his homework, built Lego towers, blown out birthday candles. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I stood and gathered my dishes, rinsed them in the sink. "You have until Friday evening. If you need help moving your things, I'll call someone." He opened his mouth, but I was already walking away. Upstairs, I could hear Esme on the phone again. Her voice was tight, frantic. "No, we can't stay. Don't ask questions. Just tell me if you have space for us for a few nights." The plan was unraveling. I could feel the shift in energy inside the house. The air was less tense, less oppressive. Even the floorboards seemed to creak differently, as if relieved to no longer carry the weight of false intentions. That afternoon, I began reclaiming the spaces they had occupied. The study came first. Harold's chair was in the wrong place. The rug was askew. His desk drawer had been rifled through. I carefully set it all right again, piece by piece. I took out the small photo of our wedding day and returned it to its place of honor on the shelf. Then the sewing room, now stripped of its essential oils and yoga mats. I packed Esme's things into the same boxes she'd brought them in with, sealing them neatly with tape and a note on each. "This space was never yours." The master bedroom was last. I didn't go in until late, when the light was low and gold. I opened the closet, stared at the mix of familiar and foreign. Harold's coats still hung there, unmoved, but next to them, neatly arranged, were Esme's things. Blouses, shoes, makeup bags. I touched nothing. Instead, I walked to my bedside drawer and pulled out the note Harold had left me. The real one. It was short, handwritten in his firm, patient script. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you the way I wanted to. But I believe in you, I always have. This house is yours. Your dignity is yours. Don't let anyone rewrite that. H. I pressed the paper to my chest and let myself breathe. For the first time in months, I truly felt alone. But not in the empty way. Alone, like stillness after a storm. Alone, like ownership. Like peace. Downstairs, I could hear boxes being moved, voices low and bitter. Esme's anger was sharp. Stuart's responses were passive. They were fracturing. But that was their burden, not mine. That night, I lit a candle in the study and sat in Harold's chair, the house quiet again. I could almost feel him beside me. You'd be proud, I whispered, not because I won, but because I remembered who I am. And somewhere in the silence, I swear I heard the old house settle, as if it, too, had been waiting for me to come back home. The next morning brought with it a strange kind of light. Soft, gray, but gentle. The kind of sky that doesn't push you to move quickly, but rather invites reflection. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my cup, watching as fog curled along the garden path. The roses Harold planted last year were just starting to bloom again. I wondered if they even noticed the chaos that had been unfolding just beyond the window. Upstairs, packing had begun in earnest. I heard the scrape of boxes across the hardwood, the thud of drawers being emptied. No yelling this time, no accusations or bargaining, just the quiet rustling of people who knew the door was closing and there wasn't anything left to wedge in the gap. Stuart came downstairs mid-morning. He was wearing a hoodie I didn't recognize, but his eyes looked like the ones I used to see after soccer games as a child. Wide, unsure, waiting for comfort he wasn't sure he'd earned. I know it's not much, he said, holding out a worn-looking envelope, but I wrote something for you. I took it in silence. The flap was unsealed. He sat across from me without invitation, elbows on knees, eyes lowered. I didn't know what to say to your face. I figured I'd try in writing. I nodded. Thank you. He hesitated. Can I say something else? I met his eyes. If it's the truth. He took a deep breath, then released it slowly. Esme, she pushed. But I let her. I didn't stop her. I kept telling myself it was about being practical, about doing what was right for you, but really, I was just trying to avoid dealing with you being alone, with Harold being gone, with my own guilt. There it was. The first crack of honesty. I wanted to fix it by making it go away, and I convinced myself that letting her take the lead would make it easier, but it just made me smaller. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch between us, the way Harold used to do when someone wasn't finished telling the truth yet. I still love you, he said. I never stopped, I replied quietly. That's the tragedy. He looked away, wiping at something on his face. Maybe dust, maybe regret. I placed the envelope on the table between us, untouched. Words are easy, I said. Living with them is the real task. He nodded, stood, and walked back upstairs. The rest of the day passed in measured moments. Esme never looked me in the eye, not once. She avoided being alone with me entirely, choosing instead to bustle about like a ghost passing through walls. At one point, I heard her mutter something about not being treated fairly, and after everything I've done, but her voice carried no weight anymore. By evening, they had packed most of their belongings. Boxes were stacked in the front hall, like passengers waiting for a train. The guest room stood stripped and bare again, the way it had been before they came back. Not empty, but clean. Ready. Dinner that night was quiet. They offered to eat out, to give me space, but I refused. If this was to be their last evening in the house, I wanted to witness it. I made something simple: tomato soup, grilled cheese, a slice of peach pie I had frozen from the summer before. Food that smelled like comfort and memory. They barely touched theirs. Esme excused herself early, muttering something about an early start. Stuart lingered. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked. I looked at him for a long time before answering. "I've always been okay, Stuart. You just forgot to ask." He lowered his gaze again, the way children do when they realize they've done something that can't be undone. After he went upstairs, I remained at the table. The candle flickered low. The smell of baked bread still lingered. I let myself sit in that moment, one foot in the past, the other quietly stepping forward. I opened the envelope Stuart had given me. Inside, his handwriting was uneven but earnest. "You were never a burden. You were our strength. And I see that now. Too late, maybe. But I see it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry I let anyone, especially myself, treat you like you were something to be managed instead of someone to be cherished." I closed the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in my keepsake box, alongside Harold's final note and a pressed flower from our first anniversary. Because even betrayal, when owned with honesty, can be mourned and stored away with grace. I turned off the lights and went to bed alone, but not lonely. For the first time in weeks, I slept without locking the door. Because soon, this house would be mine again, not just in legal title, but in energy, in spirit, in safety. And in the quiet spaces between each breath, I felt something rise inside me. Not triumph, just peace. Friday came with sunlight. Not the harsh, glaring kind, but gentle and warm. It filtered through the windows like a promise, softening the edges of old furniture, breathing life into the shadows that had crept in over the past few months. The house felt lighter, as if it too was waiting for the moment they'd leave. I woke early, before even the birds. I moved through the kitchen in silence, placing a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas, Harold's favorite, into a ceramic vase I hadn't used in years. The blue petals glowed in the morning light like folded satin. By 8, the front door opened with a sharp click. Stuart came down first, arms full of boxes, his footsteps slower than usual. Behind him, Esme followed, phone tucked between her shoulder and ear, barking short commands into it as she juggled her designer purse and a tote bag marked fragile. I stood by the stairs, watching as they made trip after trip. The quiet was almost surreal. No goodbye yet, no thank you, just the sound of movement. At one point, Esme brushed past me without so much as a glance, and that's when I realized she wasn't angry anymore. She was humiliated. People like Esme don't fear failure. They fear exposure. And I had stripped her plans bare. By noon, the house was nearly empty of their belongings. The guest room echoed. The coat rack near the door stood bare again, no longer burdened with expensive wool and faux concern. I made lemonade. Set out 3 glasses on the porch table, just like I used to during Stuart's summer breaks. When he stepped outside for one last breath, I handed him a glass. He took it slowly. "Thanks," he said. We sat without words, sipping. The porch creaked under us. The wind smelled like cut grass and old promises. "I don't think she'll ever get over this," he finally said. "She doesn't have to," I replied, "but she has to live with it." He nodded. "I thought I was doing the right thing for both of us." "You thought wrong," I said gently, "and it's okay to admit that. But it's not okay to keep going in the wrong direction once you know." He swallowed. "I've been thinking, maybe I need space. From her. From everything." "You'll figure it out," I said. "You always could. You just stopped trusting yourself." He looked at me, surprised. "You still believe that?" "I believe in growth and consequences." Esme appeared in the doorway, keys in hand. "We're ready," she said flatly. Stuart stood, looked back at me. "Take care of yourself." I already am. He hesitated. I'll call. I nodded. When you're ready, for a real conversation. He didn't answer, but he didn't object either. I watched them pull away in the car, its tires crunching down the gravel path. I didn't cry. I didn't wave. I just stood there, feeling the last remnants of their presence dissolve into dust. The house exhaled with me. Back inside, I walked from room to room, my fingers grazing the walls. I opened windows, let the breeze chase out the stale air. I put on the old record player in the living room, Billie Holiday crackling with static and soul. The couch looked different without Esme's throw pillows. The study was quiet again. The sewing room held the soft scent of lavender, no longer masked by eucalyptus and ambition. I spent the rest of the afternoon restoring things, not just furniture, but energy. I opened the closet in the master bedroom and slowly took out Harold's jackets, running my hands along the sleeves like they might hold his warmth. I folded Esme's forgotten blouse into a box and set it outside, neatly labeled, unclaimed. That night, I made dinner for one. Mushroom risotto, a small glass of wine, candlelight, not because anyone would see, but because I wanted to see beauty again. I sat at the head of the table, not waiting, not mourning, just being. The clock on the mantel chimed softly. The house was still, but this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was sacred. I went to bed that night and slept with the door open again. A soft breeze lifted the curtains, brushing my skin like a goodbye I didn't need to speak aloud. Because now, the house was finally full again. Full of breath, full of truth, full of me. A week passed. Then another. No phone calls, no texts, no unexpected knocks at the door. Just peace. I kept waiting for the guilt to creep in, for the loneliness to make itself known in the echo of footsteps that weren't there anymore. But it didn't come. Instead, I found myself waking earlier, sleeping deeper, breathing slower. There was healing in the quiet. I started tending to the garden again, really tending. Not just watering and pruning, but getting my hands deep into the soil, replanting, rearranging, letting the earth teach me something about patience and revival. It was Harold's garden once, but now it was mine. I planted marigolds under the kitchen window, bluebells near the path, rosemary by the porch, because Harold always said the smell reminded him of Sunday mornings. And slowly, the house felt like home again. One afternoon, I came across a box I hadn't opened since the move-in chaos. It was tucked behind a pile of old linens in the hallway closet, with Stuart's handwriting on the side. Junk, toss? I carried it to the kitchen and opened it on the counter. Inside were photos, some in frames, others loose. School plays, birthdays, summer trips. Stuart at 8 years old in a pirate costume. Me and Harold on our 25th anniversary, cheeks flushed, laughter frozen in time. Beneath the photos, I found a letter addressed to Mom. It was old, maybe written during his college years. The envelope was yellowing at the edges, but sealed. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. I know I haven't said it enough, but I'm grateful. For the sacrifices. For the boring meals you packed. For the way you stayed up late helping with math, even though you hated it. You've always been my constant. My home. I might not always show it, but I carry you with me. Stuart. I stood in the kitchen, letter pressed against my chest, and let myself feel everything. The grief, the love, the quiet ache of a mother who raised a boy with her whole heart, and watched him grow into a man who lost his way, but maybe not forever. I didn't cry, I just breathed, and in that breath, I forgave him a little. Not all at once. Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a slow, tender undoing, like a knot being loosened one thread at a time. That evening, the doorbell rang. I paused at the top of the stairs, uncertain. No one had come unannounced in weeks. Through the window, I saw a young woman standing awkwardly, with a bag slung over her shoulder. Mid-20s, maybe younger. She looked nervous, but familiar. When I opened the door, She straightened quickly. "Hi, Mrs. Matthews. I'm Lila, Esme's niece." I blinked, surprised. She smiled faintly. "I know it's weird. I was just passing through town and I always liked this place. I haven't been here in years. Since I was a teenager," I nodded slowly. "Would you like to come in?" She hesitated. "Only if it's not too much trouble." I opened the door wider. "Come, you'll have tea." We sat on the porch, steam curling from our mugs. She looked around at the house like it was a storybook she'd once read and half forgotten. "This place always felt warm," she said, "like it belonged to someone who cared." I smiled. "I still do." She looked down. "I heard what happened. With Esme, with Stuart." I said nothing. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, for the way they treated you. That's not how family's supposed to be." Her voice caught a little. "I live with my grandma now. She's not well. But I promised myself I'd never treat her like that." I reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "It means something that you came," I said, "and that you saw. Even now." She smiled, small and grateful. As she left, she turned back once at the gate. "Your house still feels like a home, even after everything." When she was gone, I stood on the porch and watched the sun dip below the trees. The past had tried to move in and rearrange the furniture of my life. But I had held my ground. And now, even strangers could feel it. This was not a place to be claimed. It was a place that stood, because the woman who lived here remembered who she was. And she wasn't going anywhere. 2 weeks later, the letter came. It was from Stuart. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter, stamped, handwritten, folded neatly in the kind of envelope that takes effort, intention. The handwriting was unmistakable. I paused before opening it, my thumb resting along the edge of the flap for a long moment. Then, I slid it open with a kitchen knife and unfolded the pages. It wasn't long, but it was full. "Mom, I moved out. Esme and I aren't together anymore. It wasn't just the house. It was everything. I've been sleepwalking for years, going along with what seemed right instead of what felt right. I kept thinking I had time. Time to make it up to you, time to explain. But I see now that sometimes time runs out before you're ready. I've taken a short-term lease on a small apartment near the park. I've started volunteering at a local community center. I'm trying to do better, to be someone you'd still be proud of. I know I have no right to ask anything from you, but if you ever feel like seeing me, or just hearing my voice, call. Love, your son." I read it twice, then set it beside my tea and stared out the window. Funny how letters could say more than 100 conversations. Stuart had done what I didn't expect. He stepped away. From Esme. From the comfort of being told what to think. From entitlement. From denial. He was trying. And something about that made the house feel a little quieter, but not in a bad way. That evening, I went to the community bulletin board down by the old grocery store. It was something Harold and I used to check every Saturday morning before errands. I hadn't been in years. But today I brought a flyer. Handwritten, posted with 4 clean tacks. Tuesday evenings, tea and stories with Eleanor. A warm seat, a fresh cup, and an old tale or two, for anyone who needs a moment to breathe. It was simple, and that night I prepared the living room. Not polished, not staged, just real. I laid out teacups that hadn't seen company in too long, fluffed cushions that had sat undisturbed since Harold's last birthday. I even lit the fireplace, even though the spring air was soft and kind. On Tuesday evening, someone came. Then the next week, 3 more. A young woman named Clara, who just moved in from out of state. A man named Richard, who had recently retired and didn't know what to do with his evenings. And a quiet boy named Amos, who didn't say much at all but always stayed to help wash the cups. They didn't ask about my family. They didn't know about Stuart or Esme. They only knew the woman in the cozy armchair who told stories about simpler times, who passed around warm scones, who listened without rushing. In that circle, I was not forgotten or outdated. I was essential, needed. One night, after the others had left, Clara lingered. She glanced at the photos on the mantel. "That's your husband?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "Harold, 42 years of marriage." "He looks kind." "He was." She looked down. "My parents divorced last year. They don't speak anymore. It's weird how people just leave when things get complicated." I smiled gently. "Sometimes leaving isn't the worst thing. Sometimes it's the beginning of something better." She nodded, thoughtful. "Will you keep doing this group?" she asked. "As long as someone keeps coming." The following week, someone brought cookies. The next, someone brought a poem to read. I realized then I hadn't just taken back my house. I had opened it, and it had begun to fill with new stories, new warmth, new reasons. One morning, while watering the rosemary bush, I found a small package at the gate. No note, just a small brown box with a ribbon. Inside was a handmade candle. Lavender and cedar, my favorite. And folded beneath it, one line on a simple card. For the woman who reminded me that stillness isn't weakness. No name, I didn't need one. The roots I'd planted, some deep, some new, were growing again. Not just in the garden, but in my life. And I had finally, fully remembered something that had been taken from me. My home isn't a structure. It's a reflection of who I am. And for the first time in years, that reflection was clear. It was a Sunday morning when Stuart called. I almost didn't answer. The name flashed on the screen as I stood in the kitchen, kneading dough with flour-dusted hands. The phone buzzed once, then again. I stared at it for a long second before wiping my fingers on a cloth and picking up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then his voice, cautious, careful. "Hi, Mom. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "I'm baking," I said, "but you've got a few minutes before the second rise." He let out a small, almost nervous laugh. "You're still baking on Sundays, huh?" "Some habits don't need breaking." He hesitated. "I was wondering if I could stop by sometime, just for a visit. No pressure." I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was angry, I wasn't. But because I needed him to sit in that space, to feel the weight of what he was asking. A visit wasn't just a visit anymore. "I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. "Not to move in, not for money. I miss you." There it was. The truth, finally said aloud. "I'll think about it," I said gently. "Write me first, like before." He was quiet, but I could hear the hope fluttering in his chest. "I will." We hung up, and I returned to my dough. That afternoon, as I placed loaves on the windowsill to cool, I thought about all the times Stuart had sat on that same sill, legs swinging, fingers swiping at steam just to sneak a taste. Maybe it wasn't about rebuilding what had been lost. Maybe it was about starting again. Slowly, carefully, like a new recipe, one you don't rush, one you honor with time. Later that week, his letter arrived. It was longer than the first, more open, full of stories from his childhood I hadn't heard him mention in years. He even included a drawing Amos had given him from the tea circle, which apparently Clara had shared with a nearby art club. "I think you're doing more than hosting tea," he wrote. "I think you're healing a part of this town that needed someone like you." I placed the letter in my memory drawer. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I poured more of myself into the weekly gatherings. More people began showing up. A widow who hadn't spoken much since losing her partner last winter. A shy high school teacher who baked sourdough on weekends and loved ghost stories. A mother of two who said the Tuesday evenings were her only quiet space in the week. And they came not just for stories, but for silence too, for knowing glances, for the warm lamp glow and the safe presence of a woman who had stood firm when the world tried to take her house and name away. One evening, after everyone left, I found a small envelope under my chair. It was from Richard, the retired man with kind eyes and hands that trembled just slightly when holding a cup. Inside was a photo of his late wife and him, sitting on a park bench in fall. On the back, in neat script, were 5 words. "Thank you for the porch light." I stared at that photo longer than I expected to. It reminded me that sometimes we become home not only for ourselves, but for others who are still searching. That night, I finally replied to Stuart. A short note. "The porch light is on. Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Just tea. No apologies." And I meant it. Not because I wasn't still hurt, but because I had made peace with what happened. He'd either come as the son I once raised, or he wouldn't come at all. But I wasn't holding my breath. I was holding space. That following Tuesday, the usual crowd arrived, laughing, arms full of cookies, books, small comforts. And then, just as I set down the final teapot, I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel path. I didn't turn. I kept pouring. Because whoever walked through that door wasn't entering the house they remembered. They were stepping into the house I had reclaimed. The house that was mine. The house that now asked to be respected, not inherited. And in that moment, as the front door opened and voices softened, I smiled. Because I didn't need permission to belong here. I always had. The room was already full when he stepped in. Laughter floated from the kitchen, the gentle clink of spoons and cups, someone retelling a funny story about a neighbor's cat getting stuck on a roof. It was the kind of noise that wraps around you. Not loud, not chaotic, but alive. Familiar. Safe. I was arranging the lemon shortbread on a plate when I noticed the pause. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight drop in volume, the moment people sense someone unfamiliar has entered a sacred space. Stuart stood in the doorway, still as a statue. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in wear. He was holding a box, small, gift-wrapped, crumpled at one corner. He seemed unsure of whether to step forward or turn around. Clara saw him first. "Hi," she said, friendly but cautious. He nodded. "Hi, I'm Eleanor's son." A ripple passed through the room. Heads turned. Not out of judgment, but curiosity. I didn't rush to him. Instead, I met his eyes, held his gaze, then turned back to finish my task. "Find a seat," I said, voice neutral. "You're late." He blinked, then gave a small sheepish smile and took a place at the edge of the circle. No one asked questions. No one made it awkward. They just made room. That's what we do here. I served tea like always, poured slowly, added honey, offered biscuits. The ritual was grounding, for me, for them, for him. He sat quietly at first, listening, occasionally nodding. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to take up space that wasn't his. He just observed. And I could tell. He understood. This was no longer his mother's house the way he once believed. This was a place he had to relearn, step by careful step. Near the end of the evening, when most had left and the last of the tea had gone lukewarm, he approached me in the kitchen. The box was still in his hands. "I brought this," he said. I dried my hands on a towel and took it gently, unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a framed photo, me, Harold, and Stuart. The summer before Harold's diagnosis. We were at the lake. I had on my ridiculous straw hat. Stuart's shirt was inside out. Harold had one arm around each of us and the biggest grin I'd ever seen. The frame was carved wood, not fancy, but clearly handmade. The bottom edge was etched with the words, "Still a family." I stared at it for a moment, then looked at Stuart. "I don't know if you'll want it," he said, "but I've been carving. It helps me. Stay steady." I thought maybe this could live here again. I nodded slowly, my thumb brushing over the grooves of the wood. "I'll think about it." He smiled. "That's more than I hoped for." He helped me tidy up, quietly, carefully. I watched the way he moved, how he asked before touching anything, how he folded the napkins exactly the way I used to when he was little. When he turned to leave, he hesitated in the doorway. "Thanks for the tea," he said, "and the seat." "Anytime," I said, "but you have to earn your refills like everyone else." That made him laugh. "The real kind." After he left, I placed the photo on the side table in the study, next to Harold's ledger and the first guest book from our tea circle. Not front and center, not forgotten either, just part of the story. Later that week, Stuart returned, not for tea, but to mow the lawn. He didn't ask. He just showed up with gloves, a rake, and a quiet determination. Clara caught sight of him through the kitchen window. "That your son again?" she asked, sipping her drink. I nodded. She smiled. "He's working for forgiveness, huh?" "No," I said. "He's working for clarity. Forgiveness comes after." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some big, sweeping reconciliation. But that's how healing happens. Not in shouts and apologies, in gestures, in effort, in showing up again. And slowly, that's what Stuart began to do. Each Tuesday, he came a little earlier, stayed a little longer, brought fresh lemons once, a borrowed book another time, never overstepping, never assuming. One day, Richard leaned over to him during the tea and said, "We've all made mistakes, kid, but you kept walking back. That counts." Stuart smiled, humbled. "I'm still learning." A pause. "Aren't we all?" I said. "Because that's the thing about reclaiming your space. It teaches you how to offer it back on your own terms. Not from guilt, not from fear, but from strength, from wholeness." And week by week, this house, the one they once tried to take from me, grew fuller, brighter. Not with people who needed a place to stay, but with people who came to stay a while, and knew how to leave gently too. Spring turned to summer. The garden bloomed wildly this year, as if making up for the silence it had endured. The roses stretched higher than I'd ever seen. The lavender spilled over the stone path in soft purple cascades, and the rosemary grew thick by the porch steps, fragrant and alive. It wasn't just the flowers that grew. Every week, more faces found their way to the house. Some came just once. Others returned again and again, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the smell of freshly baked scones, or the soft glow of the porch light, or perhaps the unspoken promise that no one here would be asked to explain too much. One evening, a woman named Teresa brought a small notebook. "I don't talk much," she said, "but I write." I was wondering, maybe I could read something? Of course she could, so she did. Her voice shook at first, like a bird testing its wings, but the room stayed quiet, still, patient. And when she finished, when she whispered the final line of her poem, there was a silence so full it felt like music. We clapped. Not loudly, just enough. She smiled in a way that cracked something open in me. A reminder that this house was no longer just a place to defend. It was a place that restored, that healed. Stuart showed up more regularly now, not just on Tuesdays. Sometimes on Thursdays, to help carry in firewood. Other times on Saturdays, with fresh jam from the market. He'd offer it casually, then stay to sip tea on the porch, listening more than talking. One afternoon, he came with a box of old VHS tapes. "Found these in storage," he said. "Thought you might want them back." Inside were home movies I hadn't seen in years. Stuart's third birthday, Harold making pancakes in his robe, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper everywhere. "I don't have a player anymore," I said, running my fingers over the dusty cases. "I do," Stuart replied. "I could transfer them, digitally, if you want." I nodded. "That would be nice." A week later, he returned with a USB stick. "It's all there," he said. "I even cleaned up the audio." I waited until that evening to watch them. I sat alone in the study, the room dim except for the glow of the monitor. And there we were. Younger, softer, laughing. Harold's voice boomed through the speakers. "Say hi to the camera, Elle." And I did. I watched myself wave, awkwardly, shyly, then turned to lift Stuart into my lap, both of us squinting against the morning sun. I didn't cry. Not quite. But I felt something shift again. This wasn't a story about betrayal anymore. It was becoming a story about return. And that's the thing most people don't realize. Return doesn't mean going back to what was. It means facing what changed and choosing to stay. That Saturday, Stuart stayed late. We sat on the porch after the last light had faded from the sky. He cleared his throat. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Do you think there's a version of us that still works?" He didn't mean me and him. He meant all of it. The trust, the mother, the son. I thought for a long time before answering. "I think there's a version of you I still believe in," I said. "But it can't be who you were. It has to be who you become now." He looked down, nodding slowly. "I'm willing to try," he said. I placed a hand gently on his. "I know." Then we sat in the dark, saying nothing else, just listening to the hum of crickets and the slow creak of the rocking chair. Later, as he stood to leave, he paused by the door. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe one Tuesday, I could bring a story, one of my own." I smiled. "The circle's open, if you're brave enough." He grinned. "I am now." After he left, I walked through the house, past the worn stairs, the humming kitchen, the picture frame he'd given me, now sitting on the mantel. And I whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the house itself, "We're getting there." Because we were. Not back to what was, but towards something new, something honest, something earned. The Tuesday he brought the story, the weather was soft and golden, one of those late summer evenings where everything feels suspended in amber. The regulars came early, buzzing with the kind of energy that only arrives when seasons start to shift. Clara brought her sketchbook. Richard had a new joke about a dog and a postman. Teresa wore a floral scarf and quietly handed me a folded poem. She'd read it next week, she said, not tonight. Tonight was Stuart's turn. He arrived with a small black notebook in hand, frayed along the edges like it had been opened and closed more times than he could count. He looked nervous but not afraid. There's a difference. Nervousness is human. Fear is forgetting you can begin again. I lit the lamp in the corner. Everyone took their seats. Stuart sat in the circle between Clara and Richard and cleared his throat. "I haven't done anything like this since college," he said with a sheepish smile. "And back then, I think I wrote more about beer than about truth." Laughter. He looked down at the page, fingers pressing gently along the crease. I called this, "What She Taught Me When I Forgot She Was Teaching." The room grew still. Then he began. It wasn't a perfect story. Some parts rambled, some images stumbled, but it was real. It was about being small and growing up and leaving home and realizing too late that your home was more than a place. It was a person, a mother. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. He spoke of the way she carried groceries without complaint, the way her silence could speak louder than anger, the way she once taped a crayon drawing to the fridge for 6 years, long after the tape yellowed and peeled. When he finished, there was a beat of silence, then soft applause. I didn't speak. I didn't hug him. I just nodded. And that was enough. After tea, while the others helped clean, Stuart stayed behind. He stood near the piano, tracing the keys with one fingertip, not pressing them, just remembering they made music. "She'd be proud of you," he said suddenly. I looked up. "Esme," he clarified. "At least the version of her I used to believe in. She always thought she was the strong one, but it turns out you were stronger than both of us." I said nothing. Then he asked the question I'd been half expecting, half dreading. "Do you think I could move back?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not into the house," he added quickly. "Into town, just nearby. I don't want to be far anymore." That made my breath catch, because it wasn't about convenience. It was about connection. "It's your life," I said. "You get to shape it now. Just make sure you're not carving it around guilt." He nodded. "I want to build something honest this time." "You've got the tools," I said, "and now you know what not to build." He laughed softly. "Fair." He helped me finish the dishes, then stood at the door, unsure again for just a second. "I'll see you next Tuesday?" "If you bring the cookies," I replied. He smiled and left. The house settled again, as it always does. But this time, the silence didn't return, because now the house hummed. With memory, yes, but also with motion. I walked through each room that night, touching the doorknobs, the window latches, the grooves in the banister. All the small things people forget matter. This house had endured. It had held betrayal, weathered manipulation, and stood against every subtle attempt to erase its heart. But it had also healed. It had welcomed strangers, restored laughter, carried the scent of baked bread and blooming lavender. It had learned to let go. And so had I. That night, I sat on the porch long after dark, watching fireflies blink lazily across the lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled past. And I realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the part where I stopped proving myself, where I simply lived, because I didn't need to defend my worth anymore. The people who once called me useless were gone. The people who stayed or returned knew better now. And I finally remembered who I'd been all along. Morning light spills across the hardwood floor like a soft whisper, touching everything with a golden tenderness. The air is still, not the stillness of absence, but of peace. Today is quiet, not because no one is here, but because no one is trying to take anything from me anymore. I sit in Harold's old armchair, the one that used to creak under his weight when he'd fall asleep reading. The cushion dips differently now, like it's learned to hold me too. In my lap is the guest book we started at the first tea circle. I flip through it slowly, page by page. There's Clara's inked sketches in the margins, Richard's neat cursive with little dates and weather notes, Teresa's pressed flower petals between folded corners. Every page is proof, not of victory, but of reclamation. I look around the house. It's the same, but everything in it feels earned now. Lighter, more sacred. The curtains Esme bought are long gone. I replaced them with the lace ones I found in the attic, the ones my grandmother made. The kitchen hums with the low sound of the fridge and the occasional clink of a spoon in a teacup I forgot to put away. Outside, the wind stirs the wind chimes. Their notes are slow, melodic, like lullabies drifting in reverse. There's no need to rush anymore. No one is asking me to prove my worth. No one is watching for me to fail. The garden out front is still blooming, though the lavender is beginning to dry at the edges. Summer's retreating, gently, respectfully. I close the guest book and walk to the porch. The swing creaks as I lower myself into it. My hands rest in my lap, empty for once. Across the street, a new family has moved in. A little girl plays with sidewalk chalk, her laughter high and unburdened. Her mother waves to me from their porch. I wave back. Inside, the kettle whistles low, but I let it sing for a while. There's no urgency. When I finally rise, I carry the teapot to the porch and pour just one cup. For me. I sit back, the cup warm in my hands, the breeze brushing across my cheeks like memory. I think of Harold, of the last note he left me, of how I once thought his final gift was protection. But I see now, his final gift was permission, to take up space, to choose peace, to redefine the ending. And so I did. I was called useless, forgotten, silenced. But I stayed, and I watched the house empty, and fill again, with new laughter, with truer voices. They begged to stay. But I learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes, forgiveness is simply standing in your own home and whispering, "This is mine," and letting the silence answer, "Yes, it always was." So tonight, as you sit wherever you are, maybe with the lights dimmed and the hum of a fan in the background, I want to thank you for walking this road with me. You've heard the words I never thought I'd share. You've sat in my rooms, felt the sting and the warmth, the betrayal and the peace. And maybe, just maybe, you've remembered something about yourself too. your voice, your worth, your place. So now turn off the lights. Let the screen go dim. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the story settle. Like dust on the windowsill. Like sunlight on old wood. Like the soft, steady beat of a home finally at rest. End of script. Good night.